The calculus of modern warfare is no longer about firepower. The legacy media fixates on kinetic ordnance, the missile launch, the artillery barrage, because it is visible. This is a strategic misdirection. The kinetic cost of a superpower conflict is prohibitive. The real battle space has shifted from strength to weakness. The primary vector of attack against a complex global system is not a projectile. It is silence. A targeted severing of undersea fiber optic cables. A strategic blinding of low Earth orbit satellite constellations. The adversary does not need to win a war of attrition. A conflict model Russia has been locked in for 1,418 days. It only needs to induce a systemic communications failure. This protocol creates what analysts at CSIS term the blind Leviathan. The modern state is a networked organism, its financial markets and military commands entirely dependent on a constant, uninterrupted flow of data. When you sever its optic nerves, the beast is not dead, but it is rendered inert, thrashing, a liability to itself. It cannot transact. It cannot command. It cannot respond. This is not theoretical. Reports confirm India's critical infrastructure is already under sustained threat from AI-fueled cyber warfare. As internal pressures mount in Iran, with reports of a massacre unfolding and Israel remains on maximum alert, the strategic calculus for a cornered regime changes. Unable to compete kinetically, the mathematical certainty is a pivot to asymmetric attacks on systemic vulnerabilities. RUSI assessments confirm that specialized naval assets capable of targeting deep-sea infrastructure are operational. The objective is not to defeat an army, but to trigger a global solvency crisis by attacking the digital plumbing of the world economy. The adversary's weakness becomes the accelerant. The silence is the weapon. The motive is not ideology. It is bankruptcy. A nation-state, like any corporation, operates on a balance sheet. When a state engages in a prolonged war of attrition, it acquires a catastrophic domestic liability. The kinetic cost exceeds any potential gain, threatening the regime's internal solvency. Analysts at CSIS have framed Russia's special military operation as a terminal solvency event. Reports confirm the conflict has now surpassed 1,118 days, the exact duration of the Nazi-Soviet war. This is not a sustainable vector. It is a slow-motion liquidation of the state's strategic reserves, military hardware, and political capital. When a regime's survival is on the line, the calculus changes. This is visible not only in Russia but also in Iran, where reports indicate a massacre is unfolding to crush internal dissent. A state facing either external defeat or internal collapse is mathematically forced to pivot. The pivot is away from the kinetic battlefield it can no longer afford, and toward the systemic vulnerabilities of its adversaries. This is the asymmetric escalation protocol. Unable to win symmetrically, weakness itself becomes the weapon. The objective is no longer to win the war, but to make the cost of continuing the war unbearable for the West. It is a launch-on-warning strategy against the global financial system. The logic is irrefutable. If our state is going insolvent, we will trigger a solvency crisis for the entire system. The core of this new battlefield is an economic equation. A report from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, presents the raw mathematics. A primary kinetic asset, a main battle tank, costs approximately $5 million. The asset used to neutralize it? A $500 first-person view drone. This is not a balanced exchange. It is a systemic liability. For every dollar of lethal force projected by the drone, the legacy system must spend $10,000 to counter it. The math does not lie. This inversion of cost is what analysts label the democratization of violence. The ability to project lethal force is no longer a monopoly held by nation-states with trillion-dollar defense budgets. The barrier to entry for kinetic impact has collapsed. A failing state or non-state actor can now procure and deploy a level of lethality that, a generation ago, was the exclusive domain of superpowers. It's an open-source arms race, and the manufacturing base is the global consumer electronics market. This economic reality is the engine for asymmetric escalation. A state facing internal collapse or battlefield attrition is mathematically forced to leverage this disparity. It cannot compete dollar for dollar, so it will not. Instead, it deploys the $500 asset not just against tanks, but against the true systemic vulnerabilities. The multi-billion-dollar energy terminals, financial data centers, and logistical choke points of its adversaries. The goal is not to win a kinetic war, but to trigger a solvency crisis in the system supporting the war. The operational blueprint for systemic collapse is not being drafted in a war room. It's being stress-tested in what intelligence agencies designate gray zones. These are not failed states, they are proxy laboratories. Seemingly isolated events, warnings of instability in nations from South Africa to Canada, are not the cause of systemic risk. They are the symptoms of a pre-staged deployment, the chosen geography for testing asymmetric protocols. The evidence for this staging is irrefutable. While the kinetic war in Ukraine surpasses 1,418 days, the length of the Nazi-Soviet front, the real attrition is economic. A state bleeding resources on the battlefield is mathematically forced to seek leverage elsewhere. Concurrently, a regime like Iran, facing internal collapse as protests escalate into a reported massacre, loses the capacity for conventional deterrence. Its strategic calculus is reduced to a single option. That option is asymmetric escalation. It is not a theory. It is a documented vector. Reports confirm India's critical infrastructure is already under siege from AI-fueled cyber warfare. This is a field test. CSS analysis confirms that adversaries use these gray zone environments to measure the blast radius of non-kinetic attacks. They probe the systemic vulnerabilities of secondary targets to perfect the weapon before it is aimed at the core. The objective is to calibrate the weapon, to learn precisely how much pressure to apply to a regional energy choke point or a nation's digital spine before it fractures the global system. The state of maximum alert reported in Israel is not merely about a potential missile strike. It's about the launch-on warning posture against a systemic, not just kinetic, attack. The weakness of the adversary has been weaponized, and the testing grounds are now active. The nuclear protocol is not based on impact. It is based on data. This is the launch-on warning doctrine. Strategic command does not wait for a city to be vaporized. It launches its counterstrike the moment its deep space satellites and ground-based radar confirm an inbound trajectory. The logic is a zero-sum calculation. Wait for kinetic impact, and you lose the capacity to retaliate. The entire deterrence framework rests on the integrity of this warning data. This protocol is now the primary vector of attack. Reports confirm that AI-fueled cyber warfare is an active and escalating threat to critical national infrastructure. An adversary does not need to risk a multi-trillion-dollar kinetic exchange. They only need to attack the data stream. This is the fog of digital war, a systemic condition where the command authority cannot distinguish between a genuine launch and a sophisticated data injection attack. If a cyber attack blinds the radar, the commander is mathematically forced into a launch decision under conditions of absolute uncertainty. The screens may show 5 inbound warheads, or they may show nothing at all, no signal. In either scenario, the protocol is compromised. Is it a system failure or a decapitation strike already in progress? To hesitate is to gamble with national extinction. To launch is to initiate global escalation based on what could be a digital ghost. This isn't a theory. It is the endgame for a state facing collapse. A nation being drained by a war of attrition, now exceeding 1,418 days, or a regime facing internal meltdown, cannot afford a symmetric conflict. Per CSIS analysis, its only remaining leverage is asymmetric. It exports its internal chaos directly into the adversary's decision-making cycle. By creating a crisis of information, the weaker power forces the stronger power to risk self-destruction. This is how weakness becomes the accelerant for a global solvency event. The conflict in Ukraine has now surpassed 1,418 days, the length of the Nazi-Soviet war. This is not a metric of endurance. It is a financial statement. As a state's kinetic options are exhausted in a war of attrition, its strategic calculus is reduced to a single protocol: asymmetric escalation. Simultaneously, internal pressures are mounting within Iran, with reports citing rising death tolls from protests, signaling a state apparatus under extreme duress. According to CSIS analysis, when a regime faces either internal collapse or external stalemate, it is mathematically forced to change the battlefield. It must attack the systemic vulnerabilities of its adversaries. The weapon is not a missile, it is a ghost in the machine. Rusi confirms that AI-fueled cyber warfare is the designated tool for attribution, impossible attacks on critical infrastructure. The objective is not destruction, but systemic paralysis, a solvency event triggered by a digital key. The calibration shot will occur within 12 months. Expect a systems failure blackout at a major liquefied natural gas (LNG) terminal. Not an explosion, but a complete multi-day logistical paralysis. The event will be attributed to a software glitch, but it is designed to be a clear, deniable signal demonstrating the capability to turn off the energy flow to the west. It is a test of the vector.